Hey guys, welcome to the People First podcast. I have my good friend here, Brett. Now, Conellan.
Nailed it.
Nailed it.
Nailed
God, I'm the worst with surnames. I never ask people how to say their surnames before I get them on the show, and then I think, should I just not say it or have a go? So I'm glad I nailed that, Brett. Thanks so much for giving me the confidence within myself to do that. Now we have Brett here, and I have been following Brett's story for a few weeks. I stumbled upon it on Instagram, and it grabbed my attention. It really sort of invoked something in me that, like, a little bit of fear, a little bit of uncertainty. And before I ruin the intro completely for Brett, I'm going to let you introduce yourself and tell me a little bit about you and some of the things that we might be talking about today.
Sure. I always find it interesting how people come across the story, and I guess the way that you describe it then is probably a pretty good indication of how people do come across and what they think at the start. So I guess I find it hard to intro myself in a way like that, but there's sort of three phases of my life that I use to kind of describe my journey. And it's firstly as a surfer, followed by a shark attack survivor, followed by a storyteller. So that kind of takes us through the story as quickly and as swiftly as possible. And how far you want to go into each of those stages, I guess, is up to you, and it's up to where this conversation goes. But something that really brings me a lot of, something that brings me a lot of happiness is being able to share that story now about all parts of those stages there, because they're all important to my life in different ways. And I think that's the cool thing about when people do come across my story, is knowing that there's different parts throughout that everyone connects with, and it might not be, there's not many people that can connect with the shark attack, which is obviously the bit that draws a lot of people in. But
brings the ears around.
Exactly. But there's things in all other parts of my story that people can kind of relate to. And then there's this one adversity that kind of ties it all together, which is something that I think a lot of people, although can't see eye to eye with the shark attack, can see eye to eye with adversity and what it means to life. So, I mean, that's probably the best elevator pitch I can give you.
I totally resonate when you say that. We've all had, if you think about it, and I know this sounds extreme and I don't want to downplay what happened to you, but we've all had our own shark attack in some way, like the trauma of something that's grabbed us, literally in your case, and in our minds, for us listening on, that says, hold on, we're all connected in that. I have been listening to a lot of your stuff on Instagram, and your cool, calm nature is what draws me to want to have you on the People First podcast. So thanks so much for coming in. But the fact that you're local New South Wales, like Kiama, born, bred down there, right?
Yeah.
Yep. And just so close to home, I feel like you already have that affinity with each other, like I know a little bit about some things that you might have gone through as a kid or whatnot, or growing up, especially being here in Australia. It's a really good way of doing that, because I've heard of a lot of survival stories where you don't feel that same connection. But, we've pretty much swum in the same waters. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? So I wanted to bring you on and get a start all the way back. And the People First podcast, we go straight back to, how was your childhood, Brett? Where did you sort of hang around? Run us back as far as you can remember that you want to start this story for us, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I kind of lied when I said born and bred Kiama. I was born in Sydney, but my parents moved there when I was very young. So it's all that I've ever known. And growing up in a small coastal town like that, you're so close to the ocean and the water that whatever you do, it's going to lead you in that direction in some way or another, whether it be through like nippers or just spending time at the beach. For me, and for a lot of people, it's surfing. So I started surfing when I was 11. I was in and around the water for a long time before that, just doing nippers, bodyboarding and things like that. But at the age of 11, much to my dad's delight, because he's a long-time surfer, he finally got me to stand up on a board rather than lay down on it. And that was kind of a tipping point in my life. I'd spent a lot of time playing a number of different sports when I was younger. Like, you name any sport and there's a good chance I played it. Like, I played the obvious ones like soccer, footy and AFL, stuff like that. Yep. Played all of those, but I played obscure ones as well. Like, I played water polo for a while. Like, I played.
What about field hockey?
Field hockey I missed out on.
Yes, I got in the field hockey realm.
so I played so many different sports, but the year that I picked up surfing was the year I dropped all of those other sports, because there was something about surfing that just took over me, and it was all I wanted to do. It's all I wanted to spend my time doing. And from that age when I first stepped on a surfboard, I knew that I wanted my life to have some sort of direction heading in that vein of surfing, whether it be just to do it for fun or to be around it. As I continued to grow up and go through school and stuff like that, and surfing was always a big part of that, I started to get better at the surfing, but there's, that balance between like life, doing school and all of this, and surfing and doing competitions was always a big part of my life growing up, but it was nothing, I didn't have a lot of success in the surfing realm when I was younger. That kind of came a little bit later on. And generally speaking, like when you speak to a lot of people who, have kids that are getting into surfing these days, they get in so early. They'll get into surfing when they're like 4 or 5 years old.
So they've got 6 years on when you start.
Exactly. And they're usually having a lot of success in competitions by the age of 15, 16. And by that age, you can kind of see the kids who are going to make something out of surfing as a career or have some sort of success. But that didn't come until later for me.
Yeah.
And I think a big part of that was the time, like I started later. There was a later development, but I kind of put that down to just getting smarter as I got older and had a bit more common sense towards how you go about a surf comp. So when I say later on in life, this happened when I was sort of like between 20 and 22.
Yep.
So I'd finished school already.
Just to give context, what's the average sort of length of the surfers? Like this, in some sports you got, 20 to 30, but would it be longer for surfing?
It used to be. Like when you look at the world tour, it used to be a lot of older guys, or like guys kind of firmly in their 30s that were the main guys. But now it's a lot of younger guys. It's kind of like 18 to 25. And with the exception of, Kelly Slater, there's not many older guys on tour anymore. So that development came so much later for me, which was, it was strange to kind of go through that because there's this expectation at that point as a surfer that you probably haven't made it. But for me, I knew that there was so much more to my surfing, and it wasn't until like late 2015 that I started to have the success that I knew I could have in my surfing, and started having better results in competitions that led to me gaining a bit more belief and people around me gaining more belief in my surfing as well. So I kind of was at a crossroads where I was looking at my life heading in two directions. As I said at the start, I always wanted my life to be revolving around surfing in some way, and I'd kind of set myself up to have a career in surfing, whether it be, I was a surf coach. That was my first ever job, and I had a surf school. So I'd started down that road.
Yep.
I'd been managing a surf shop for years. So that being in the industry was part of my life already.
Yeah.
But this crossroads was, do I give it a crack and put all my eggs in this one basket of competitions and trying to make it professional?
Yeah.
And due to those results, late 2015, I decided that 2016 was going to be the year that I did that. And I kind of just needed to take that leap of faith and know that I was going to give it my all. And I didn't want to look back when I was like in my 30s or 40s and be like,
what if? Right?
What if? Yeah. Like, you talk about that old guy at the pub was like, oh, I could have made it. I didn't want to look back and have that regret. So I made the decision that was going to be the year. Kind of had this goal and had all the events mapped out, and said to myself, okay, well, what else do I need to do to make that a reality? I need to work on training. So doing like surf specific training, being in the gym, working on my surfboards, working on my nutrition, like everything I did was then channeled into this one goal. And I had the first events of the year planned out. They were going to be up and down the coast here, and then look at some of the international ones. The events didn't start until kind of, usually some of the bigger events will start in autumn. So around sort of April, May. But March that year, as I was spending a lot of time training around home, that is kind of when, my life changed. And it's funny how like it is hard to kind of broach this in a way that's not shocking and say like a shark really derailed all those plans and threw a massive spanner in the works. But that's how these things work. You can't see them coming and you can't plan for them. And when people ask me was there anything strange about that day or about that time? No, it was just a random day where something incredibly unlucky happened to me, and that forced me to react. And that definitely, I mean, I'm sure we'll talk about the attack itself, but one of the first things that you try and reckon with is looking at life as you know it, which for me was trying to live out this dream of, becoming a professional surfer, something that I wanted so bad, and asking yourself, well, what now? And that's a hard question to ask yourself, especially when you're not sure how far you're going to be able to go, like in basic things in life, let alone chasing that dream again. And I think that setback and feeling that loss and going through that grief and that whole period there it's such a difficult time to grapple with, because there's so many emotions pulling you in so many different directions. Plus you've got this trauma and this injury to deal with as well.
Yep.
And that's when I say that was the most difficult part in my life. It's true, because there were so many different things that I had to deal with, because life had been pretty simple up until that point. As a surfer living on the south coast of New South Wales, life is very simple. I'm not ashamed to say that I had it very easy growing up compared to some people, and that's something that I'm very grateful and very lucky for. But I definitely wasn't prepared for a moment like this to approach me in life, especially at that point.
Yeah. And you say that you were mentioning it sort of derailed you, and you're thinking, this is a setback. And I love when you use the word setback. I feel like a little shoulder injury is a setback, or maybe like a broken bone is a setback. But the severity of the fact that, you'd literally been attacked by a shark and survived. I mean, for me, that's enough to call it more than a setback. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I do really want to unpack all of that with you. And I love the fact that you have a sporting background and a sporting goal, because being a trainer myself, I see hundreds of people a year that have sporting goals, whether it be in CrossFit, surfing, soccer, whatever it might be. And to see the level of commitment involved in even coming close to being able to buy in to enter that is unbelievable. To know that someone has to almost give everything just for the opportunity to be a part of that crowd, let alone good in that crowd, let alone a winner or a champion in that crowd. There's just so much sacrifice that goes in that. Now, you've been growing up on the South Coast in Kiama and having a chilled out, relaxed lifestyle, which I think if we all think Kiama, that's what we're thinking anyway. Did you have brothers and sisters? How was mum and dad?
So I have two sisters. I almost said had because we were talking in past tense, but I still have two sisters. So one older, one younger. So I was a middle child. My parents, my dad came from an emergency services background, so he worked for fire and rescue his whole life. My mum was in the real estate industry. So I guess one thing that really brought my family together was the sport of surfing, because my dad had done it for his whole life. He grew up in Connellan, and that was such a big part of his life.
Yep.
And just due to his love for it, that introduced myself and my sisters and even my mum. There was a point in time where we'd all go for a surf together, which is really cool to think back on. That hasn't happened for a very, very long time, for a number of different reasons. But I think when I do reflect on those early years, there's a strange thing where I know that having my family being close and in a small community was important and a big part of how I was raised, and the fact that we could all go surfing together was amazing. But I wouldn't say we were the closest of families, because my dad was still working up in Sydney, mum was working really hard. When you've got two sisters, like, you don't tend to have the same group of friends and stuff like that. So we weren't always together, but I think when I reflect on those times when we did all surf together, that was really nice. And to be honest, now that I think about it, I actually haven't really talked about this and don't know how it kind of sort of comes across, but the next, besides those early times when we were all surfing together, the next time that we were all together was in hospital after the attack. And it's funny that you reflect on it took something bad to bring us all together.
To glue back together.
But I think that kind of speaks to the strength that a family has. And although we weren't physically close all the time, then we were all close. And it's not like there's any issues in the family or anything like that to speak of. Like we're all close as far as we love each other and we care for
we're
each
a
other.
typical family. I think we
Exactly.
can take our family for granted sometimes, and sometimes we just know that if there's shit that goes down, then they'll be there, and shit went down.
Yeah,
you know, and you got exactly what you'd expected of your family: support, love, and care.
Yeah.
As opposed to a lot of fractured families where that would be, okay, that sucks for him, but hope he does well. You know, there's a complete different energy with what you're saying, and I think that families, we have to do our own things and know that if we ever needed to come back, we could.
Yeah.
Because then how do we become our own people rather than living through each other as opposed to living our own lives? You know, I'm unfortunate, I guess, to come from my original birth family was a bit fractured. Like my mum and dad split up. I left home at a young age at 15. Never went back, haven't spoken to them. So I don't have what you speak of. And I'm sure if there was something severe to happen to me, I think in the back of my mind, you would think that they would come back to, I don't know, who knows? But you have an actual experience where that has happened for you. Now, just so we know and we can settle these debates before they start a thing in your family, who's the best surfer out of you and your sisters? Just so we clear that up.
Oh, me, for sure.
Yeah. Probably listening go, you are.
Well, like I think this is something that's come up in the previous years as I've kind of gotten further away from surfing since the attack, and that's just due to viewing life a little bit differently. I think my older sister loves surfing more than me.
Yep.
But she doesn't get to do it as much as me. She lives in France, so her husband is a ski instructor, so she's away from the ocean most of the time. And I think her love for surfing comes from being removed from it a little bit, whereas I probably do take it for granted a little bit.
Yep.
And you know, I wish I had the enthusiasm that she has for it at times, because it's awesome when she does come back and I do get to surf with her, because you see how much she loves it.
Yeah. And just so we bring your dad in this, is he better than you? He goes, when I was your age, I was better.
Well,
you know, dads are always like, "Oh, you're good there, son," but really, I think I would have had you when I was your age.
There's a thing in surfing that I remember when you were growing up, that the moment that you get better than your dad, like your dad's like the barometer for good surfing when you're starting out, and then as soon as you're a little bit better than him, you're like, oh, okay. And my dad's always been a recreational surfer, not a competitive surfer, so it didn't take long for me to get past his ability.
Yeah.
But he's someone that he hasn't surfed for years now.
You can just jump back on and just go for it.
Well, I would hope so. It's been so long since he's been out in the water.
That actually brings up a question for me, Brett. Does your attack, does that tend to ripple into the family? Do you reckon there's a lot of like, you've suffered majority of the trauma, right? You were the number one center stage situation, right? Does that ripple out to your mum, your dad, and your sisters and go, fuck, I don't actually want to get in the water because like obvious reasons?
Yeah, and I know that's something that's affected, especially my older sister. Like she did struggle to get back in the water a little bit afterwards, and
because you think they would see it, even though they weren't present when this happened. But at the same time, you think in their mind they're just seeing your journey, what they've witnessed.
Well, that's the way my older sister kind of describes it, is the way that she was looking at it is, she's the older sister. You always look out for your younger sibling, and she always viewed me as being at home in the ocean. But when that happened, she said it felt like the ocean betrayed you.
Yeah.
And that's a straight, like, I never felt like that, but that's how she viewed it, because I guess when she wasn't around, the ocean was like in her place. It was someone that could, exactly. Yep. And I think that's something that specifically impacted her.
Yeah.
And I mean, I always say for what I went through, I would much, if someone else in my family was to be attacked by a shark, which, you know, going by the odds, going by everything, I hope wouldn't happen.
Shouldn't happen. Yeah, that's right.
And shouldn't happen. But if it was to happen to anyone again, I would still rather it be me than anyone else, because I think it's actually, there's something strange about going through that. And I don't know if it's because I have been through it before and I know what it takes to go through it, but I would also hate to go through it. I mean, this is the other side of it too. I would hate, it's hard to say which one I'd rather be in, because I would hate to be one of the family members as well.
Dealing with that with one of your siblings or your mum or dad, or
because I guess for me, there wasn't much I could have done, especially the early days, like when I'm in hospital and stuff like that. They're the ones that are sitting in the waiting room, stressing and dealing with all the phone calls. And this is not specific to a shark attack. This is anything where something bad happens. I guess, I don't know, maybe all of this doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and it's kind of shrouded in this fear that I have of, I think one of my greatest fears is receiving a phone call that something bad has happened to someone that I love. Like, and I think knowing that that has been the moment for other members in my family is something that pains me. And I that probably reverses how I would answer the question. I don't think I would want to be one of my family members, which is a strange thing to say. Yeah. And that probably just comes from my own fear of what that
the pain from that. Yeah. Despite all the pain and trauma you went through in regards to the attack, you still feel that the pain and trauma having to witness and not be there to help or support or do anything for a family member to be more exponentially more difficult to deal with. And having contrast, you've got that. You know, most of us don't have that contrast, whereas you actually go, you know what, although it was hard, I still think watching my sister or my mum or my dad go through that harder than anything that you would have maybe experienced in that moment. Again, it's just the selflessness of yourself, right? You're like, well, okay, this is an easier thing to deal with. But also, on the other side, the emotional side, maybe not so much, right?
Yeah. I think to sum up, not getting attacked by a shark is probably easier than getting attacked by a shark.
Yeah. So I do want to talk about the day itself as well. And, you know, I had a friend of mine who went through you know, like a traumatic event, you know, a car crash sort of thing, right? And sits there and tells me that, like, on the day, felt like the best day ever, to be honest. Like, getting in the car, sun was shining, tunes like blaring at the radio, windows down. All of a sudden, you know, shattered glass, blood, you know, full on, like a car accident. And so for them, it's like, it's so funny that, like, there's have no warning and completely blindsided. And you touched on the fact that it felt like an ordinary day. And do you want to run us through the day that, you know, your life kind of changed?
Yeah. So I think that's interesting. I don't know if you do go through something like that and you put a focus on what the day was like, that you can pinpoint what it was like, if it was a great day or if it was a bad day, because like I have done that for myself, and there's points of the day where you could say I shouldn't have got out of bed, and there's points of the day where you could have said it was a great day, I can't believe it took a turn. And I think in reflecting on it like that, I've kind of just decided that you can't really view a point in time, or a day in this case, through the lens of something that happened that makes it a significant day, because like my day has ups and downs like every day. So my day on the 30th of March 2016 actually starts off at 2 a.m. I get a phone call from my boss at the surf shop saying the shop has been broken into. Wow. So that there, if you were someone who was looking at things through a microscope, you could say, just don't leave home that day.
But life has got to be lived.
Exactly. So you don't think about that when it happens. You don't receive a bad phone call every time and be like, well, I'm just not going to move for the next 24 hours and we'll start again tomorrow.
And I'm not going to deal with a broken into shop either.
Exactly.
What if they're still there?
Yeah. So I got that phone call. He was like, obviously there's nothing you can do, but I'm just letting you know. So when you come in, you'll have to deal with it, essentially. So
did you say you probably could have called me at 6 a.m., not 2 a.m.?
Well, yeah, but he was a bit frantic. He didn't know who to call. He didn't know. Yeah. So I went into work a little bit earlier that day because I knew there was stuff to deal with, and spent the day just dealing with like cleaning up glass, figuring out what had been stolen, talking to police, doing all that sort of stuff. So safe to say, not a great day. And that took up the entire day at work, was dealing with all of that. So we had to get new front window and all of this. So I'm driving home from work and I'm like, all right, well, it's been a pretty bad day. I'm going to go for a surf, because a surf is always going to help turn this day around.
Yeah,
so
that's what you love, right?
It's what I love, and that's one of the great things about surfing. It's always been a great way of coping for me. I mean, surfing itself, when you look at it as like a coping strategy, is great. Like, it's outside, you're in the sun, it's exercise. Yep. There's a ton of pleasure that comes from being out in the ocean. There's something about saltwater therapy. Your friends are there. Like, it's such a great thing to do. I'm not thinking this as I'm going there. I'm just like, all right, I've had a bad day. I'm going to go surf.
Yep. Just autopilot.
Exactly. So I call my friend Joel as I'm driving home, and I tell him I'm going to go for a surf at Bombo. I know there's a couple good waves there, so I'll be out there in like 40 minutes because that's about how far away from work home was. So I was working up in Thirroul, and then it's like a 40-minute drive home. So I tell Joel I'm going to go out Bombo when I get back because I know there'll be waves, and I just know I need to go for a surf. So I arrive at the beach. The waves look pretty fun. I'm straight out there. And the surf is good. So Joel comes out after about 30 minutes. Joel, it's probably worth outlining now. So he's usually the person that I'd call to go for a surf. And the reason I'd call him 40 minutes before I go out there is because he's the type of friend that's always late. So, I mean, everyone's got a friend like that. So Joel's always late to stuff. The ongoing joke is that he's always doing his washing because that's always his excuse when he rocks up and he's late. So,
oh God.
So I call, and he still rocks up half an hour late after I call him 40 minutes before I go for a surf. So that gives you an idea of his.
He's over an hour late, yeah.
Yeah. So, and if he doesn't show up late, he's not going to show up at all. So. So Joel comes out after about half an hour and we're surfing together. We decide to surf a little bit further down the beach to where everyone else was. There was probably about 15 or 20 people that were surfing right up the north end of Bombo Beach, and we decided to surf about 200 or 300 meters further down just because there was no one there and there was a few fun waves. So we were having a fun surf. I was telling him about the break-in, who they thought, because they had to find who broke into it, and I was just kind of giving him that whole spiel. And we were surfing together for about 40 minutes, just sharing waves. It was heaps of fun. Like one of the best things about a surf like this is it gets to the point where Joel catches a wave. He's about 100 meters down the beach, and I'm sitting there like actually reflecting on the day. And this is probably the moment that relates to your friend's story, is the high. Like I'm looking, good, things are feeling good. I'm looking at like the sun starting to set behind the mountain, like a beautiful afternoon. I'm actually saying to myself, for how bad today's been, at least I've been able to do this to do something for me and to try and turn it around.
Yeah.
And that's when things change. So that when we talk about the day that leads up to it, you can point at a lot of different things throughout that day, which you could say like, either positive or negative can contribute to how you might feel about the day. But I think it's just because you look at it through a different lens as a result of what happened when things change.
Yeah. So you're surfing along, you're having a pretty good time. Good surf, good waves. You're having a chat, you're debriefing, you're compartmentalizing everything that's gone on for the day. Your mate Joel's been late, but he's good value. And so then what?
So this moment when I'm like looking back at the sunset and all of that, like this is the moment when it all happens too. Like as I'm thinking, bad day, but at least. So without anything to see, without any warning, without anything, I get hit from my right side. And I don't know what it is, but it's hit me really hard. It feels, I struggle to describe it because to add impact, I say it makes it feel like I got hit by a bus, but I don't really know how that feels, and probably not. It's like a really hard like footy tackle, like someone shoulder charges you from the side. So I get thrown off my surfboard, like launched out of the water, and I land back in the water and like kind of surface and try and get my bearings and figure out what's happened. And before I can even do a full like 360 to see what's around me, I look down and there's a shark. It's swum around the other side of me and it's biting down on my left leg. Oh, yeah. And that moment there is the moment where, like, when you look down and you see that there is the situation, the reality, the enormity of what is happening. It's hitting you all at once. And this is the moment where time kind of slows down to the point of stopping. The next 5 seconds probably feels like it's about 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And this is that when people talk about fight, flight, or freeze, this is the freeze part of it.
Yeah. So
in a situation like this, I guess, when as human beings, when we are faced with something like this, where we click into that frame of fight, flight, or freeze, we need to decide what to do. And I think our perception of what fight, flight, or freeze is a little bit wrong, because people think that freeze often is like a last resort and it's like giving up. But later on, I found that freeze is actually just an information gathering exercise. It's fight or flight on hold while you figure out what's the best thing to do. And that's why there's that moment why time slows down to the point of stopping, because you are taking in all these fine details. And there's 3 things that I can remember from that moment, which number 1 is the feel of the shark's skin. So it's really rough, like sandpaper.
Yep.
The second thing is the complete absence of sound. So not being able to hear the water splashing around, not being able to hear, any of the ambient noise like the road, the cars going past, not being able to hear my screams for help.
Yeah.
Which I found out, like that's how Joel knew about it. This is when he finds out about it, is my screams for help. But I can't hear that. It's just like someone turned the sound off. It's just dead silence.
Yep.
But all of this stuff is still happening in front of you. But then the third thing is just looking the shark directly in the eye. There's just this visual image of looking down at a shark biting into your leg. And the scary thing about this moment is a shark isn't something that you can reason with and you can't tell it to stop. For me as a surfer, this is my worst nightmares coming true, like right in front of me. And the scary thing about it is there's just nothing that I can do about it. I'm just frozen here watching it happen. So then it kind of gets to the point like I'm taking in the information, it's time to act. So the natural thing that, a lot of people, when it gets to this point of the story, everyone in the back of their mind's probably screaming, just punch it. Like that's what you're supposed to do here, right?
I'm punching a shark. That's what you think you would do. There's no way that's what I'd be doing. I'd be just like, I just don't know that I would react like that.
So that's probably the correct reaction too, because there's that feeling that's like, okay, you got to punch the shark. That I think is probably a little bit misguided, because the idea of punching through water is nearly impossible.
Yeah.
So like I go to try and do that and it just doesn't work. Like there's this feeling within me. It's like, if this doesn't work, like what do you do? And out of fight, flight, or freeze, I've got one option left, which is flight. So to get away from it. That, although it is the only option I have left, it's the wrong thing to do, because flight means like pulling away from the shark and recoiling.
Yeah.
Which that's probably human reaction. It's like if someone was to put a spider on your hand, like you pull away from it.
100%.
And it's the same sort of thing when a shark's biting your leg, except it's a bit bigger than a spider and has sharp teeth. Well, I don't know.
Yeah. They've got rows of teeth.
Yes. So I pull away from it. But the bad thing about pulling away from it, and why people say it's a mistake, is because when you do pull away from it, the shark doesn't just let go of your leg. It holds onto the flesh it's holding in its mouth, and it just separates it from your body. Oh. So my first instinct is to just not look down.
Yeah.
I don't want to.
Yeah,
I don't want to know how bad that damage is, and I don't want to go into shock. And plus, I've got this window of escape that I need to take full advantage of. So I put my head down and start swimming to the shore as fast as I can. And I get about 20 meters further in and have this terrifying thought come over me, which is like, I wonder if this shark is going to come back a second time. And I look over my left shoulder and see this shark moving towards me, and I have just enough of a reaction to put my hands out to try and stop it. I'm right-handed. My right hand's got pretty good aim. That lands on its nose. My left hand, not as good aim. That goes into its mouth a little bit, but I pull it out, and I mean, this isn't great for podcast viewing, but lose a bit of skin there, and there's a few cool teeth marks on the side of my hand there from just grazing it.
Yeah, wow.
Their teeth are so sharp. It's incredible. But I'm here, like arms outstretched, hands on the nose of the shark, and it's pushed me through the water. And I'm like, all right, well, what do I do now? And I see a wave approaching, and I think to myself, I think the only thing I can do in this situation is when the wave hits us, I'll try and push the shark to one side, and hopefully the wave has enough power that it pushes me in towards the beach and hopefully pushes the shark somewhere else, anywhere. I don't care where, just away from me.
Yep.
So the wave hits us, I push it to the left, and just immediately I'm doing front flips underwater. And it pushes me in quite a way. So I'm lucky that the wave has a lot of power. And I surface again, and I'm actually lucky I'm standing up. It's only about waist deep. So it's pushed me in quite a way from where I was. And I look up again, and luckily I don't see the shark coming back a third time. I actually look up and see Joel paddling towards me as fast as he can, which is in that moment, I don't think there's much more relief that you can have of seeing someone paddling towards you, that help that you are going to need to get to the shore. But so you don't feel alone in a moment like that. Like for the last minute, probably before the shark hit me, and then when Joel got to me, it was probably about 60 seconds, maybe a little bit less. But in that time when it's just you and this creature, you feel so alone, like it's just you versus this thing. So when Joel gets there, I mean, it's funny, like I need to give Joel credit every time I tell this story, because I make sure that I make a point of the fact that he's always late or he doesn't show up.
He's on time today.
Exactly. So
and to swim into what you know is going on. Like he knew what was happening.
Exactly.
There's not like, oh, you've just fallen off your board, I'll go see my mate and help him get his board. He knew exactly what he was doing.
Yeah.
That in itself. Oh.
Well, that's bravery. Like that's what they reserve the word bravery for.
Exactly. Running into the face of danger.
Yeah. So it's
swimming.
so I mean, as a surfer, I think that, to continue on that point as well, as a surfer, I think all surfers want to believe that that's the reaction that they'd have, to want to go and help someone, but you don't know what that response is going to be until you're faced with it, until you hear those screams and you know what's happening, and you make this subconscious decision by yourself. And it's subconscious because I've asked Joel about it, and he says that it wasn't him weighing it up. It was just, for him, my friend's in danger. This is what's happened. I have to get to him. But if he paddled the opposite way towards the beach, I couldn't fault him for that either.
Yeah.
Like because it's not a decision that he's made, it's just instinct. And his instinct was to do the brave thing, to paddle towards me. And by the time he gets to me, I'm standing up. I still haven't looked down at my leg, but he gets to me, and the first thing he asks is how bad is it? And I haven't looked down yet, so I don't really know, but he just, based on sort of his reaction of seeing how much blood was in the water and everything, like all I said was just, it's not good. And he was like, okay, cool, got it. And so I don't have my surfboard at this point, because when the shark hit me in the initial impact, its teeth cut through my leg rope. So when I was thrown off my board, I was essentially thrown in the opposite direction of my surfboard. So Joel realizes this, puts me on his surfboard, and then starts to swim us into the beach. We're not sure if the shark's anywhere nearby at this point. Luckily for us, we don't see it again, but it's still such a battle to get towards the beach, because you're seeing this thing, like, not even off in the distance, like it's an arm's reach away almost, but it takes so long to get there.
I would try and get out of the beach on a good day and I get smashed just trying to get in. Like, the pull out is just phenomenal. Imagine the adrenaline, the fear, your injuries.
Yeah.
I couldn't imagine trying to get, and then the slipperiness of, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, there's a lot of things that make it difficult. So it feels like it takes an eternity to get towards the sand, but we eventually get there, and Joel drags me up the beach and he runs off to get some help. And that leaves me laying on the sand for just a moment to try and reflect on what has just happened. And although I haven't looked down at my leg yet, still, I know based on Joel's reaction that it's bad, but I'm not sure exactly how bad. And I'm trying to weigh up, how bad are things at the moment? Like, what is actually happening? And at that point, I had a bit of pain in my stomach, and I'm wondering if I've been bitten there. And there's a lot of confusion and kind of this semi-panic around there. But I just had this strangely deep and profound feeling that kind of just caused me to freeze as I'm laying there. And the feeling was like, okay, if it's bad, how bad is it? Like, is this feeling that you're feeling at the moment, this weird, deep, profound feeling, is this thing that you're encountered with the feeling of what it feels like to die? And I'm asking myself this question, like, is this moment going to be my last? And that is a really profound thing to come across. I don't think many people get to not only ask that question, but can live to talk about it. And the strange thing about it is, for how often I recount this story, for how often I've told it, I still haven't found a way to properly articulate what it felt to be in that moment. And I think that is part of the mystery of death is that it's such a strange thing to comprehend as a human, that even when you have experienced something close to death,
Still can't put it into words.
you still can't put it into words. And the thing about it, I was incredibly close to death. Like that pain I mentioned in my stomach, I found out later was my organs starting to shut down due to blood loss. So not knowing how close I was to death in that moment, the strangest thing about it was that after I asked myself, is this what it feels like to die? There was this immediate feeling that something didn't feel right. And I don't know what that thing was. Again, it's another hard thing to articulate, but just something within me, it didn't feel like my time. And I guess this is a good thing, because then I'm like, well, if it's not my time and it doesn't feel right, then what can I do right now? And there's only a couple of things I can do. It's just breathing and staying present. I'm not going to be able to do anything to help my leg. I'm not going to be able to get up and run to the ambulance. Like, there's nothing I can do. I'm just a passenger at this point.
Yeah.
But breathing and staying present is something that started to slow down my heart rate and slow down the blood flow. It was probably one of the things that kept me with enough blood to eventually survive and get off the beach that afternoon. But I think that there, I look at the moment of when I'm like, okay, let's take things into my control for the first time. That was when my luck kind of started to change. So you look at this situation and a shark attack by itself, and it is an unlucky experience. The odds of being attacked by a shark, I mean, numerically, I've had a look to see what it is. It's anywhere between 1 in 3.6 and 1 in 11.5 million. And that ranges from like a minor attack all the way to a fatality. So the best way to describe it, it's like winning the lottery, but in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
So an incredibly unlucky thing to happen. But from the moment that I was attacked, everything after that happened was the luckiest thing I've ever had happen in my life. So starting from where the shark actually bit me, it missed my femoral artery by 2 millimeters.
2 millimeters.
So nothing. And for people that don't know, the femoral artery is a major blood supply to the leg. So if that had been severed a tiny bit, there's no way I was going to make it to the sand.
No. Oh,
that's lucky within itself.
2 millimeters.
Yeah. So that's lucky. I mean, I've already described why I'm lucky that Joel was there.
Yeah. Imagine if imagine if he had to do his actual watching that day. Like, he wouldn't have shown up at all.
Exactly. So I say there's probably about a 25% chance that Joel was there that afternoon. So when I do call him to go for a surf, half the time, maybe even more than that,
he bails.
So yeah, we'll work it out as a percentage. But so half the time I call him, he'll show up. The other half, he doesn't show up.
Yep.
When he does show up, he's always late. So yeah, it is 25%. And then half the time he does show up, he surfs with me, and the other half he's either taking photos or filming on the beach. So there's about a 25% chance that he's in the water with me that afternoon. Yeah. So that's that's the only one I can quantify as far as 25% chance that Joel was there that afternoon. And 25% chance we can grapple with. Like, you roll a 4-sided dice, and you figure that out. 4-sided dice, that doesn't exist. It does exist. It's the triangular pyramid.
Yeah, we can make any dice, don't worry.
Prism.
We got 4.
Yeah, so that people can kind of reckon with, but from that point, the luck starts to get a little bit more obscure, because the person that Joel ran off to get help from was his now wife, Aggie. So this is the first afternoon I've ever seen Aggie watch Joel surf. Yeah, so she came to watch him surf that afternoon. They were originally going to go for a swim at the river, but when Joel said that I'd called to go for a surf, they changed their mind and came there. And it's the first time I've seen her at the beach watching him surf. Like, she was just there to enjoy the afternoon. She was the best person, I think, to be on the beach that afternoon, because she's an intensive care nurse.
Wow.
So she wasn't the one that came and tended to me straight away, because she was, first of all, trying to figure out what supports I'd need, what type of paramedics they would need, what helicopters they would, like, she knew exactly what equipment they would need. So she was straight on the phone calling the ambulances.
Not just saying, oh, there's an accident at the beach.
Exactly.
No, this is specifically what's happened, and then you don't get these things here in the next 2 minutes, we got no chance.
Yeah.
So she's just like directed everyone to save your life.
Exactly. And the reason that she was doing that, obviously it's what she knew how to do, but she wasn't needed down to tie tourniquets, because there was already a nurse that was walking along the beach that afternoon whose name's John.
Got a whole hospital down here.
Exactly. So So the fact that all of those things went in my favor to essentially keep me alive and, to get me off the beach that afternoon. Yeah, you're about to say it wasn't meant to be that time because it really, there's something about it. And whether you can look at it numerically and try and reckon with what the odds are of all those things happening. There's some people that would just look at the numbers and be like, yeah, okay, I understand that. Or there's people that can try and understand it through, faith or through some higher power or whatever it is. I don't know how to explain why I went from the unluckiest I've ever been to the luckiest, just time after time after time after time. And I think that's something that it kind of just adds to the reason why I do what I do in sharing this story, because it could have so easily gone in the other direction. Like I could very easily not be here to share this story. And it is something that I think when you look at this experience, and it is a traumatic experience that can be difficult to talk about for a lot of people, including myself at the start. It's something I'm more comfortable with now, obviously, but it would be very easy for me to, if I did survive it, to say that was a terrible experience. I never want to think about it. I never want to talk about it. And just to kind of go into my shell and just pretend it didn't happen. Like that is obviously the thing that happens sometimes during trauma. And that is why it's a complex issue within itself. But the way that I started to look at it was, I have this story that people do find interesting. They do find it intriguing for the reason around the shark aspect of things. And there is so much after the attack itself that I wanted to be able to share with people. But the reason I do it is because 99.99% of the time, like, my story ends in tragedy. And for some reason mine hasn't. And I feel like there's almost a duty there to use that story to try and help other people, because that's something that I didn't have before. Like, I didn't have this story to share, and I didn't have this message that I wanted to share as well, which came a little bit later on. But when I do look at everything that went in my favor, like, you can't not look at that stuff and be grateful.
100%. Now you're laying on the beach. Your mate's gone off. He's got his now wife, Aggie, right?
Yep.
She's created a survival plan and got you the help you need. You have a nurse by your side. Within how long after you're dragged out of the water did all of this happen, and where did this nurse come from, and what happened next?
Yeah, so John, the nurse, was walking along the beach. He was probably about 100 meters away, like when Joel got back to me after telling Aggie. So he's yelling at John to come over and help. Luckily, John's like, all right, cool. Well, what do we do? Like, he slips into his role as a nurse, and he's like, okay, where's the vein? Where's the artery? What do we have to do? They grab my leg rope, Joel's leg rope, and start to tie tourniquets. And over the next 15, 20 minutes, all the other surfers that were out there, they start to figure out what's happened, because they see all these people congregating on the beach and they know it's bad. And they slowly start to come in, and as people come in, there's another leg rope, there's a wetsuit to tie around it. So they're slowly tying tourniquets and stemming the blood flow.
Yep.
At that time, is probably 15, 20 minutes before the ambulance arrives.
Wow.
So they were stabilizing me, but there's more and more people showing up. And the ambulance arrives.
You're fully conscious at this.
I'm conscious the whole time.
Far out.
So there's a funny thing about, as I'm laying on the beach and I'm completely conscious and I'm trying to stay calm and I'm trying to focus on my breathing. And I think one of the things that helped this whole rescue effort is because I was calm and because I wasn't panicking and hysteric, that I think that rubs off on the people around me that are doing what they need to do. Because I liken this feeling to a time when I was in primary school. Yeah, I was in year 6. So year 6, I went to an AFL gala day and I was playing this game, and a bigger dude that I ended up going to high school with, he lands on me. I break my collarbone. And I'm laying there in the middle of the field, and you know what happens when kids break, like when there's an injury at a school carnival or something like that, there's like 80 to 100 kids that all converge around this one person. So that's what this took me back to. It was that feeling of, being 12 years old and having all these people around me as I'm laying there with a broken collarbone, but this is a little bit more serious. And I have that same feeling, but the reason I have that feeling is because the surfers that are coming up to me are all like my friends and all people that I know. And I'm trying to be calm. And like, I can remember this one specific one where there's two people that I can remember. One of them is Wade, who had donated his wetsuit to tie around my leg. But when he rocks up, he looks down at my leg and he's just like, just shock.
Yeah.
And I look at his face and I'm like, oh, that's not good. But I'm like, okay, I need to figure out a way not to buy into the reactions that are going to happen.
I mean, you could have almost had a paper cut this time and they'll be all like, oh my God, and you're still going to freak, like.
Yeah. But then the next person that comes along is one of my good friends, Geordie, who I'd grown up with surfing, and he rocks up before he can even react to it. I'm like, hey, Geordie, how are you? And I'm trying to be calm, and he's like, good. How are you? How are you? So I'm conscious this whole time, and as all the people are congregating. And
how's the pain, though? Like, are you feeling pain?
There's no real pain at that point. Because there was the pain in my stomach, but yeah, there was no pain in my leg. So I think the pain, because you have so much adrenaline and all this other stuff going through,
right? Like,
at some stage, but by the time the doctors have got there, they start administering like morphine and stuff like that. So in a 20-minute span, I think there was enough pain that was kind of being staved off that I didn't really have an issue with it at all. And because I hadn't looked down at my leg yet, I didn't really know how to perceive the pain yet, because I didn't know how bad it was. Like, so much of pain is
power of the mind, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So I think that played such a big part in me being able to stay calm, because I just I wasn't aware of it.
You didn't know the severity of your injury.
So I think that was something that definitely helped. But the paramedics arrive, they take all the leg ropes and stuff off, and then they put their tourniquet on. They start doing the pain stuff, and then the helicopter comes about 20 minutes after that. So at that point, there's so many more people that get there. Like, there's the people that were there on the beach that afternoon. My parents actually get the call to come and see me. So that's the other thing that happens. Like, Aggie, she's like, I need to call your mum. Where's your phone? I'm like, it's all right, I can remember her number. Yeah. So I recount her number to Aggie.
Hilarious. So it's on the beach. 04,
yeah,
33.
Seriously.
No, 21. Yeah. 217.
Yeah. It's exactly what it was.
Come on, Aggie, get it together. 217.
Yeah.
217.
Yeah. So I recount the number. She walks away, and I know she's about to have an incredibly difficult phone call to make. And again, I know this because if I'm on the other end of that phone, like that, again, that's my worst nightmare. I don't want to know what that's about. But at this point, they've started, giving me the pain medication, which takes you a little bit out of it. So I'm still conscious, but I kind of know what's happening. It feels like 2 minutes later, my mum and dad rock up.
Yeah, wow.
Like they only live about, I would say, 7 minutes away from the beach.
So it's possible with that information they could have been there in 120 seconds. Yes.
Well, yeah, it's definitely possible. Well, my dad working in emergency services, he's got sirens on his car. So
he knows how to drive.
So it could have been, they got there so quick.
Yeah.
And shortly after, there's cameras and media and stuff like that, which is inevitable when something like this happens. I
mean, the people must know.
Exactly.
Exactly. Straight away before the families know, before, like far out.
Well, it is interesting. So although I told Aggie mum's phone number and she called her while we were on the beach, I found out later on that one of my good friends who was on uni exchange in England at the time, one of the other guys that was on the beach actually called him because he was just in shock and didn't know what to do, and he knew he was one of my mates. And that phone call that went to him arrived faster than my parents got the phone call.
Oh, wow.
So it's crazy how fast news spreads, and it's no shock that the media gets there so quickly because they're pretty dialed into all this stuff. But the media gets there, and then shortly after, helicopter. So the helicopter comes down.
And your mum and dad are there before the helicopter?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was probably something that made it a little bit harder when it gets to the point of, like, when the helicopter gets there and they do what they need to do, they give me more pain medication. And then they're like, okay, we need to go. And there's this point in time where my mum's with me on the beach, and they're like, okay, we got to take him in the helicopter. And she's like, can I come with? And they're like, it's like a 1-seat helicopter. There's no room.
Yeah.
And
got a doctor on board and that's it.
Exactly. So I think she had in her mind that she was going to be able to be with me along there. So that point in time when they tell her that she can't go, this is happening at a time where the pain meds are kind of hitting me, and this is when I'm starting to fade in and out of consciousness a little bit more.
Yeah.
But I just remember that being a really emotional moment, and her pain in not being able to come on the helicopter, that kind of passed off onto me a little bit. So when I do get taken away, I feel really alone, because there was like, she could have been there. There's this weird feeling of that. But so I get taken in the helicopter and wake up shortly after in hospital, and the first thing I try and do is call in sick for work.
I don't think someone would have done that for you, but I think it was your obligation. But
so it's actually really fun. Yeah, I'm trying to, because I'm intubated, so I have the tube down my throat because they put me in a medically induced coma, and I worked at DP Surfboard, so I'm trying to like sign in the air like DP. So, and then the nurse is like, I don't know what you're talking about. Although I'll get your parent. And mum comes in, she's like, she's in some sort of shock still, and she's happy to see that I'm awake, and I'm doing the same thing to her. And then they finally take the tube out, and then I'm like, Mum, you need to talk to DP and tell him that I can't come to work today. And she's like, oh no, he knows about it. And she was like, everybody knows. And I was like, oh.
Yeah.
So it wasn't really until I woke up, and then I was like,
well, how long
this
did
is
they
actual
put
news.
you in a coma for?
I don't actually know.
Yeah.
I should find that out, because I do get asked that question probably more often than what I should.
Was it a day or was it days?
Well,
you think far out. Surely my shift's gone by now.
I'd say it'd be around somewhere between 12 and 24 hours.
Yeah, okay.
But I'm not exactly sure how long. But it's hard to tell when you're in ICU and stuff, because there's no windows and you don't know when it's daytime or anything like that.
Yeah. I mean, I've never been in a shark attack. I've never had been put under. But being in hospital for 3 days after a motorbike accident, I didn't realize I'd been there for 3 days.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, wow. I mean, I've been here for 3 days.
Yeah.
Like, had no idea. Felt like one day.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm sure it's just I arrived an hour or two ago. So, no, Shane, you've been here for 3 days.
Yeah.
And you're also stuck to the bed because we didn't dress those wounds on your back. Oops.
Oh, yeah.
Needed to get you out of bed today.
That sucks.
I'm very keen to sponge bath me, but anyway.
Yeah.
That's another story. So then you're in this medically induced coma. You wake up. Your first reaction is to call in sick for work, which it seems
bizarre,
almost humorous.
Yeah.
And then your mum comes in, and how was that? Like, so you're waking up for the first time, and you're gonna be told like what's gone on. Like you're like, oh no, these are your injuries, and here's the potential of the next 50 years of your life. You know.
Yeah. Yeah. So.
Because you're only young.
Yeah. Exactly. So, I kind of briefly talk with mum, but I'm like heavily under the influence of painkillers. So I'm like only just keeping my eyes open enough to kind of roughly hold a conversation and feel sort of her emotions in that. But we didn't really talk too much about the injury itself. Like I look down and there's this massive bandage surrounding my whole leg, and I can't see how bad anything is or anything like that. There's kind of like a dull sort of pain happening down there, but nothing excruciating. And I kind of fall back asleep and then wake back up, and there's like a bunch of doctors that are kind of surrounding me, and they're talking about what they need to do. And there's like a bunch of different teams. There's honestly like 15 or 20 people that were in this one room with me, and they're all from like the cardio team, the trauma team, the plastics team. There's all these different people in there, and they're trying to figure out what's actually happened. So how much of the leg is gone. And they're like, that's the first thing we need to do, is determine how much muscle has been lost or how much of the leg has been lost, because that will determine if we need to amputate or not. Yep. That along with if there's any damage to the bone itself. Yep. So they're kind of outlining this, and they're like, so based on the first operation that they did, they were like, we did that basically to kind of do a little assessment of it, but just to clean as much sand out of it as possible. They're like, based on what we saw, you're missing about 3/4 of your left quad.
Wow.
They're like, things aren't looking great at the moment. Like if there's any damage to the bone or if the damage to the leg is too much, we'll probably have to amputate. But we're not 100% sure just yet. They're like, we it's kind of just a waiting game. We're going to do another operation tomorrow where we clean more of the sand out of it and assess if there's any muscles that we might be able to do stuff with. But they, at the start, the message that I took away from it was that amputation was probably a pretty big chance. So a day goes by, they do another operation or that clean out, and then they come back to me the next day and they're like, good news. I'm like, okay. Like we're going to try and save the leg. And I'm like, okay, that's what I want to hear. Because for the past 24 hours, all I've been doing is going through the scenarios of what life looks like with one leg. And the hardest thing, obviously, is a lot of things that you have to adjust to in life if you have a leg amputated. Like, especially for where mine would have been amputated, it would have been right up on the hip bone. So
how high up? Yeah,
it's like the hardest thing. You talk to anyone who's had any sort of amputation, they all say an extra couple of centimeters would make the world of difference. And that's essentially zero.
Yeah. So
I'm thinking of how that's going to impact my life. So when they come in and they say, we got good news, we're going to try and save the leg, I'm like relieved. And they go, it's a bit of an experimental operation, but what we're going to do, they say, we've seen it done once before and we're going to try and replicate it with your leg here. And they say, in order to save the leg, we need to cover the exposed bone. So there's 15 centimeters of exposed bone that they need to cover up. And in order to do that, they need to transplant a muscle. And they were looking around at different ways to do this. And they say the second biggest muscle, is apart from the quad muscle, is the lat muscle from the back. So it's good. I'm talking to someone who knows anatomy as well. Yep. So they're like, we're going to take your entire left lat muscle and transplant that into your leg.
Wow.
To cover the bone. And they're like, we have to connect some nerves in there to keep that muscle alive. Some veins and some arteries to keep the muscle alive. And they're like, we'll connect a nerve as well, which might make the muscle work at some stage, but that's not really what we're focused on at the moment. It's kind of the main focus is just to prevent amputation here. So they tell me this and I'm like, this sounds good, this sounds promising. And then they kind of they get to that inevitable stage of the conversation, which is kind of like lingering. It's like the elephant in the room thing where it's like, okay, well, if you are able to save the leg, what does this mean for life moving forward? They say, although we are able to hopefully save the leg, and that's not a guarantee because we're not sure if the muscle will take, we're not sure. There's complications with that. So they're saying if things go well and you are able to keep it, they're like, walking for you is going to be a massive challenge. They're like, you'll probably be, you'll be in a wheelchair for a fairly long time. You'll be on crutches. They thought best case scenario for me was they would get this prosthesis that would sit on my knee that would straighten my leg out as it moves forwards, just because they didn't think they were going to be able to make up that muscle bulk of quad, which its function is to straighten the leg out. So if you can't do that, then you can't move forwards, you can't walk.
Yep.
So I'm sitting there being like, well, okay, having something a lot of us take for granted in walking challenged is hard to deal with, but it's better than having the leg amputated. And I'm trying to, like, as they're telling me this stuff, adjust my expectations on the fly. And it's hard. Like, when someone's telling you that walking is going to be a massive challenge, that there's going to be other issues. And they start to just go into the other things. They're like, well, because of those issues you're going to have there, being active, living an active lifestyle is going to be difficult. And then they just get to the point where they're like, but you need to know this, that you'll never surf again. And that moment there was when I knew my life was going to be incredibly different. And that was the hardest thing for me to deal with. Like, walking's one thing, but for some reason that didn't sit as heavy on me as what the surfing thing did, because so much of my life was tied to surfing. Like, so much of my purpose, my identity was tied up, and the dream that I had to become a professional was all tied up in this one sport. It was more than just something that I enjoyed to do. Like, it was who I was. And beyond that, like, that was my way of coping. It's where all my friends were. It was such a big part of my life, immediately ripped away from me, that's what caused me to really, really struggle. And that's where, you know, being attacked by a shark, losing this muscle, all of that is the catalyst for it. But for me, when I talk about what actually impacted me the most, it was not being able to surf again. And that didn't necessarily have to happen because of shark attack. There's other things that could have caused that, but that is the thing that made me realize that, you know, I guess in a way that the things that we lean on and rely on so much in life that are constants, how when they do get taken away from us, or they can get taken away from us, how much it can impact us as people. And that was the hardest thing for me to try and grapple with. You know, I'm trying to look at what recovery is going to look like moving forwards, and I have no idea how far I'm going to be able to go with anything, but there's just this overwhelming feeling within me that I don't know how I'm going to be able to live any sort of meaningful life afterwards because I can't surf anymore.
Yeah. And
that's a hard thing. Like that, I hadn't been in a situation like that before, and I had no idea how to deal with it at the time.
And that they're all, I mean, everything's like what ifs as well. Like, and then we've got this what if, and then we've got that what if, and then, but this is what's going to happen. And then you're thinking, well, and then when did it occur to you that, like, did you ever have a point where you're like, nah, that's not going to be my story. I'm going to surf again.
So
because you know that's the thing. Everyone goes, oh no, you can do it. And it's like, well, you know what? Sometimes biomechanically, like you just can't, right? Yeah. Like you take enough of me away, and you're right, you win. But am I going to win?
Well, I mean, I struggled with getting to that point. It's not something that I was like, they told me that, and I was like, nah, I don't believe you.
Stood up right there on one leg.
Exactly. So my journey to getting to that point took a while because it kind of took me to getting to more of a low before I realized that.
Still had further to fall.
I did, and a big part of that was, I think when I was laying in hospital, like, you know, we talked about hospital as a place to spend time. Like, you don't see the windows, you don't see outside. Hospital sucks. Yep. Like, the food sucks, it's cold, it's incredibly lonely.
Nobody wants to be there. Even people that work there don't want to be there.
Exactly. Like, yeah, there's no one that wants to be there.
Rather not be here today because we don't want sick people. We don't want people to help. Like,
but that environment is one that I think compounds some of the negatives that we can experience in a time like that in our life. So I've just been told all this bad information. I feel alone in what I'm going through. Like, I'm the only person that's been attacked by a shark, even though I have all this support here. I can't help but feel alone. Like, I feel statistically alone based on the fact that, you know, I'm the 1 in 3.6 to 11.5 million, but I feel alone most of all at nighttime when all the support goes home and it's just me laying in a hospital bed with my thoughts.
Yeah.
And those thoughts are telling me you'll never walk again, you'll never be active, you'll never surf again. Like, the thoughts automatically get worse and worse and worse. And I think that's hard to overcome no matter how strong-minded you want to be in a moment like that. And you get to a point where you do lack hope because you're telling yourself this negative story and it's just getting worse and worse. So it gets to a point where I'm feeling so down on myself. I'm feeling so down on whatever prospect I have in the future. And I guess using the word hopeless is pretty meaningful because in order to try and bounce back from that and to try and overcome this feeling that's weighing me down, I need some sort of hope. And it wasn't actually me that created that hope within myself. I actually got that hope in the form of a text message from my physiotherapist, whose name's Scott. So he sent me a message when I was in hospital just offering his help and support, saying that he wants to see me get back on my feet. And in this message that he sent me, he had some words of advice when it came to goal setting that changed the way in which I was looking at everything. And this is the moment where things flipped. Because his message when it came to goal setting was that people don't fail by aiming too high and missing. They fail by aiming too low and hitting. And his advice was look ahead with determination and set lofty goals. And that there was the first thing that got me to realize that I actually had a decision to make. Like, I had a choice in the matter. No matter how far I went, you know, what I was physically capable of, I at least had something in my control where I could say, I can aim high and try as hard as I want to try and get to whatever this goal is. And how far I get along that, it doesn't really matter. But there's an opportunity in front of me. And it doesn't all have to be negative and have to be something where I'm beating myself up. And this doesn't have to be my life here. If I try as hard as I can and I don't get anywhere and I circle back to the point I'm at least I know. And this kind of takes me back to, it kind of made me reflect on setting that goal of wanting to become a professional back before this whole story starts, is not wanting to look back and regret not having tried. And that's how I looked at the goals that I could have set myself. And I said then and there that I was like, I messaged Scott back and I was like, there's some amazing words. I can't wait to try and put those into effect. And I said to myself there, I was like, I'm going to try and prove the doctors wrong, and I'm going to set the goal of wanting to walk again. Yeah. And I get out of hospital the first time. I go and see Scott, and he knows I'm coming because we've got this set up, and he's already set out some goals for us. So he's got a whiteboard as I walk in, and
prepared this guy.
He's prepared. So he has these goals, and they start off very simple and basic, like regaining independence. So getting back on my feet, getting around the house, being able to go to the kitchen, go to the toilet, all these sorts of things. That progresses to regaining livelihood and getting back to work. But then up the top, there's this one big goal that's like written in bold. Like it might not have been written in bold, but I see it as bold and big capital letters and stuff, and it just says surfing. And I'm like taken aback by that because I didn't have that sort of ambition.
It's not the message you've been given up until now.
No, exactly. But like I'd left hospital thinking that I was being ambitious by saying I wanted to walk again. And Scott sees that I'm kind of like frozen, almost in fear by this goal up there. And he brings it up and he's like, what do you think about those goals? And I'm like, it's like, that seems a lot. And he's like, it is a lot. And I go, look, I'll be honest with you. I haven't really comprehended what that would mean to me. Like, and I think a big part of me shying away from that goal in the start was there was a certain fear around saying that I wanted to do that again, to get back in the water and to surf. And the fear is not necessarily around the fear of sharks, which I think is what a lot of people would suspect. Yeah. For me, the greater fear was this fear of failure. What would it mean to me if I couldn't get there? And what would that say about my character and the person I am? The harder thing to set that goal of surfing, if I couldn't get back to that point, I was essentially surrendering me as a surfer. Like that was the final thing, because I physically wouldn't be able to do it. And I had to admit to Scott, I was like, honestly, my biggest goal coming out of hospital and the thing that I was going to set with you today was that I wanted to walk again. And he kind of had like a bit of a smile on his face, and he saw this coming from a mile. He was playing chess, right? So he's a couple steps ahead.
Yeah, it's like, I'm going to move my rook now.
Yes, exactly. So he moves the next piece, and he's like, the reason we set goals like this, he said, you walk into this physiotherapy clinic, me and everyone here are going to do everything that we can to lay out a pathway towards the success of that goal. That's all set out for you. How far you get along that pathway is determined entirely by how much work you put in every single day. But in order for that to work, you have to let go of the fear of failure. Because even if you only get halfway there, you're probably going to far exceed any of the expectations that you get along the way. And we're looking at these goals laid out, and he goes, if halfway is back at work, you're walking again.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
it's true.
I get it. I get it. I see what he means by this whole like theory of setting goals. Set like
the biggest audacious goal you could think of and keep moving through. And
100%. But in order for that to work, you really have to let go of the fear of failure.
Isn't that funny that you think the fear of failure is bigger than another shark attack?
Yeah.
And how much that controls people in other areas of their life, their career, their relationships, and all their other goals, is that maybe it's not, what the obvious thing is. It's the actual inner monologue, that inner fear of failure that prevents us from reaching so many of our goals, not just surfing after a shark attack, but anything like finances, love, all of that stuff that goes into a human's life. That blows my mind. That there, when you said that, it wasn't necessarily the fear of the shark attack, it was the fear of failure that it was really affecting you.
Yeah. And that's something that took time to realize as well, because it's pretty obvious to know you're going to have some certain hurdles to overcome when it comes to getting back in the water because of that whole fear of sharks. And I always felt like that was something that I could control. Like you can look at the numbers and say, I've been attacked once. What are the odds of being attacked twice? All these sorts of things. There's other things you should be worried about every time you get behind the wheel of a car, jellyfish, all these other sorts of things. Like
I'm more afraid of jellyfish, to be honest.
So you can rationalize it as best as possible. Well, I knew I at least had an opportunity to learn more about sharks and understand the risks associated with going in the water. Maybe some of the things that led to the attack happening on that specific day. Like you can try and understand that stuff, and that's within your control as far as what you can do. But when it comes to the fear of failure, I felt like there was so much more at stake when it came to if I couldn't surf again. That's why that outweighed the fear of sharks for me. Like the fear of sharks is still there, but it wasn't outweighed by that fear of failure in those early days.
And so moving through your physiotherapy journey, what type of time frame was it for you? Like how, I mean, I assume that your physiotherapist has never helped anyone from a shark attack before, right?
You would be correct.
Yes. So for him to go, all right, well, we've got this path, this way for you to move forward. Where did you guys, did that take several years? Were you like, did you make leaps and bounds? Did you just jump up after a couple of months and just like smash your goals? Like where was that for you?
So the expectation at the start was there was no expectations. It was kind of...
Because they can be deflating if we have these expectations we don't live up to, that we can completely deflate our motivation.
Yeah, and part of that I think was known from my physiotherapist's point of view. Like he didn't want to promise too much and not be able to deliver.
Yes.
But again, he didn't want to under-promise and like you see the effects of that. Like that was what the doctors tell you.
Yeah.
Where you don't have the ambition to push forwards because you're scared of it.
Covering their own butt in that respect.
Exactly. So
I never said you could do it. Like, well, I did.
So there was no expectations for that reason, but then also for the reason that you said just before, like it's a pretty rare case. There's no, it's not like an ACL where you can say you'll be out for this long. It's not like that where you kind of have an idea of how fast you'll recover, and then like there's so much unknown that it was more like we'll take it almost week by week. And we'll see what we can do this week, and then we'll adjust next week based on where you're at. Yeah. Because there was a lot of assessment. Like we worked really well as a team, both Scott and I, because I think we both recognized that we were kind of in the same position of not knowing exactly what to expect. Yep. And that meant that we would kind of feed off each other, and we'd work through one workout program or like a week of rehab, and then we'd kind of debrief and be like, okay, where are we at? What improvements have we made? And what can we do next week to keep trying to improve? But the first 3 months of physio, that literally was leaps and bounds. I mean, it was a little bit painstaking at the start because I started off in a straight leg brace where my leg just had to be solid, stuck straight, so the leg would heal because it wasn't allowed to stretch because of the skin grafts there.
Yep. And
that was a couple of weeks, but then I got put into a different brace where they would increase the degrees I could bend my knee by, I think it was 5 degrees every week, which that's cool because it's measurable, but 5 degrees is nothing. Like you go,
I'm there.
Yeah, exactly. It's nothing. So the first time I would do squats in the gym, I was doing them to like a 30-degree bend, which is like nothing. Yeah. But it was cool to kind of work on it. And it was cool in those early days because I could quantify the improvements because I was bending my knee, I was being able to, and part of it too was I was still fairly new to being in the gym and working around that. So I felt like I was learning a lot and I was improving a lot, and that felt awesome. So it started progressing pretty quick. Like after 2.5 months, I had this brace which I could take off every now and then, and I could slowly start to like walk around like heaps gingerly. Like I was not moving at any sort of pace, and technique was kind of all over the place, but things were moving. And that essentially was like the independence box ticked. Like I could get around the house again. I could do all these sorts of things. I could get back in my car because that was a big thing. When I had my straight leg brace, I couldn't fit behind the wheel of a car. So mum was just driving me around.
You're close to 90 degrees to get back in a car.
Exactly.
Not
so
180.
yeah, definitely not 180. I can guarantee that. So I was ticking these boxes, and because they were fairly easy boxes to tick, I felt this massive sense of accomplishment. Like, it was almost every 2 weeks I was ticking off this massive box. And I felt great about recovery. But the thing about going through a recovery like this is, as you improve more and more and more, the gains that you make get smaller and smaller.
Yes.
And it kind of gets to a point where you're putting in the same amount of work every week, but what you get back is not the leaps and bounds that you had in those early days. And about 4.5 months, I'll say 4 months after the attack, I was starting to, I was into my rehab pretty well. By then I was moving around a little bit more. I started walking a lot more comfortably because I took up golf. Because I was really lucky to have the support that I needed to essentially not have to worry about work. And it was just work on your rehab full time, work on your recovery. And I had a bunch of spare time on my hands. So I was like, I need to be occupied. I'll take up golf. Which
occupied, I'll take up golf.
Yeah, it was the only thing I could really do where it wasn't high impact. But as part of that, the first few rounds I played, I would get in the cart and we'd cruise around and I'd hit the balls. And I wasn't very good because I hadn't played before, but I developed a bit of a love for it, and I found myself going and practicing and playing a lot of rounds, and just being out there and walking the course meant that my walking improved a whole lot more.
Yeah.
So it kind of got to the point where I was walking more normal. My rehab I was doing these 2.5 hour sessions every single day, and was feeling really good with all that stuff. But the only goal left to tick was surfing, and I didn't really know how much further I could get so I could surf again. There was this vague period where I kind of felt like I was just putting in this enormous amount of work, but I wasn't getting anywhere. And that was kind of disheartening in a way, because I just wanted to get that feeling of accomplishment again. And I guess at that point then you start questioning, if I feel pretty good, I'm walking around, I'm doing all these things and I've accomplished so much, am I actually ever going to be able to progress that little bit more to get back to that ultimate goal? And I started doubting it, and I started being like, well, do I have to start considering if that's not a possibility, do I have to start trying to reason with what that failure feels like? Which is, again, that was the biggest fear that I had. And even though I'd come to terms with trying to put that to one side, it's still something that I didn't necessarily want to have to let go of yet. And something that really helped me was I had an encounter with someone who was a professional surfer who had a head injury. And this head injury, basically, they lost the ability to surf, to paddle on a board. And they were really, really struggling with that. But I was talking to him, and he was saying the hardest thing for him was he could go and look at videos and footage of him the day before he had this brain injury, and he was number 3 in the world when it happened. So one of the best surfers in the world, and then he could no longer surf on a surfboard. He couldn't even paddle on a surfboard. And he said he was getting really frustrated because he was like, I know this body can do this, but the signals from the brain just aren't allowing it to. And he said the hardest thing for him to grapple with was to let go of that comparison to the person he was before. Because if he was doing that, then it'd just be a constant battle of being like, body's fine, messages from the brain aren't working, and it just happens over and over and over again. And he said for him to deal with that, the biggest thing that he wanted to focus on was not comparing himself to the person he was before, but comparing himself to the person he was yesterday. And if he did just a little bit to improve on that, then he's moving in the right direction.
I love that.
It might take a long time to get back to wherever this was here, but I started applying that to my own situation and saying, well, let's forget about that goal of surfing and just focus on improving myself a little bit every day, which I was doing because I was doing 2.5 hours in the gym. I was doing all this work. I was like, it might just take longer than what I think, because I had all that success at the start. My own idea of how long this recovery was meant to take, it was kind of warped as far as how long it was going to be. But that helped me work for the next month. And I walk into physio one day, and I'm talking to Scott, and just out of nowhere, he's like, jump on the ground and see if you can stand up.
Like a burpee.
Yeah, essentially like a burpee.
Yeah.
And I'd do it, and I'd do a pretty terrible job at it because I still have a bit of trouble like moving my knee through and doing it quickly. And I get it done, but it's pretty sketchy. And he's like, maybe try again, but act as if you're standing up on a surfboard. And I was like, I can see what you're doing here, like trying to get an idea for it.
Yeah.
So I put heaps of effort into the next one, knowing exactly what I have to do because, like the surf coach, I know the technique.
Yeah. Pull, pop.
Exactly. So I'd do that, get to my feet, and he goes, I think you jump on a board and see if you can go for a surf.
Oh, wow.
And that took me by surprise. So this is 5 months after the attack.
Yeah, wow.
And there's a mixture of excitement, but also like a ton of trepidation of being like, I'm really excited to do this because it's all I've been aiming for, but what's it going to look like? And that I didn't really know how to react. I was like, okay, I'll call someone. And I didn't know who to call, but I called my best mate, Nick, who I'd surfed with every single day before the attack. And I was like, Scott said I can go for a surf. And he was just pumped. There was no trepidation from him. He was just the excitement. But yeah, so
I've already loaded the boards. I'll meet you there in 10.
Seriously, he goes, I'll get a board. I'll pick you up. We'll go. And I was like, he hung up and I didn't have any time to think about it.
That's the best way.
And he rocks up, gets me in the car. We go to Jiroa, which is probably about 15 minutes south of Kiama. It's like this nice, perfect learner's beach.
Yeah.
And we go out and have my first surf in 5 months. And the very first wave we caught, I say, because we both caught it. Like we were both sitting out there, and like we're paddling out, I'm thinking to myself, because I know Nick's excited, and I'm still excited, but there's that reserve part of me which is like,
still got to get up on this board on a wave while it's moving. And
exactly.
The board's moving and I'm moving.
I'm trying to think of what that's going to be like, and being like, okay, I still need to prepare myself if I can't actually do it. And I'm like, I just want to take a moment to just be grateful for the fact that I'm in the water again on a surfboard. I'm paddling.
You'd been swimming and treading water before this and everything. This isn't, no.
So I hadn't done any of that up until that point. So this was the first time back in the water, in the ocean. And I'm just like, I think I just need to be grateful for this moment. If I don't stand up this time, there'll be other chances and whatever. But this wave comes through after we'd been sitting out there chatting and kind of preparing ourselves, and wave comes through and Nick's like, all right, we're both going to go. And getting to my feet the first time, there wasn't that much thought that went into it. It kind of just happened. And it happened a lot easier than what I thought, because I think there's just that natural instinct of surfing and knowing what to do that I was just up on my feet.
Oh.
And we both rode that wave, and it was by far the best wave I've had in my life, even though comparatively to some of the other waves I've had, it's like, it's only small. It's nothing special. Riding a longboard, it's nowhere near the surfing that I was doing before, but the best wave I've ever caught in my life. And it means a lot to me to look back. Like, I mean, I got it tattooed on me there.
Hey.
And it's a significant thing. The reason I got it tattooed on me is to look at that moment as such a big symbolic learning experience, because when I look at this whole experience from attack and everything that happened beforehand up until where I was at that point, I look at the person standing on the surfboard there, like in that tattoo, and compare that with the person laying in the hospital bed. And the biggest difference between those two people is experience. Like, the person on the surfboard has been through that adversity, has been through that struggle, has been to the lowest of lows, but has also developed the resilience and the grit and the tenacity to bounce back. And there's more than that. There's more to that than just saying that I want to bounce back and I want to be resilient. Like, there's a lot more, like, as far as, you know, what do you do to look after your, like, there's the mental recovery, which is its own thing over here, but the actual tools in order to get from point A to point B, the person on the surfboard now has those, because the person laying in the hospital bed hadn't been in a situation like that before. And I always say, I can guarantee if you put the person on the surfboard or the person I am today back in the hospital bed, they're not going to get back on the surfboard any quicker, but they know what struggle's like.
Yeah.
They know what it's like to deal with these setbacks, and they're far better equipped to deal with it. There wouldn't be all that pain and anxiety around not knowing what the future is going to be like, because struggles are a part of life. Like, we will all go through them, whether it's a motorcycle crash or whether it's a shark attack. And you said it right at the start, and I'm glad you did, because it's one of the main takeaways that I hope people have, is that everyone's going to have their own version of the shark attack. Everyone has that.
Yep.
And it's not about comparing different struggles. It's just, a struggle is a struggle, and it's part of what makes us as humans. It's how we learn, and it's how we grow, and it's such an important part of life. And as much as they suck in the moment, we can always look back on those moments as almost being the most valuable moments of our lives as far as what we learn. Because when we are faced with those obstacles in the future, when we can reflect on what we've done in the past and we can apply what we learned to get through the next struggle, that's resilience right there. Like, that there is resilience, is knowing that we've been through these struggles before and we can do it again.
We've come up. That's right. Thanks for putting up with me there, Brett. It's, the camera loves it. It's half an hour, and then battery's got an hour and a half in it. Now, we've got back on the board.
Mm-hmm.
How does that, to have someone believe in you like Scott did in that respect, where you really didn't even believe in your own ability too much? Because, like, how were you two? Like,
Yeah.
you're like, well, okay, awesome, but I mean, I don't know that any of that's true. You know, you're moving through that and you're progressing. What has that done for you in regards to building these friendships with the people that you would never have met in any other situation? Like, that must bring you so close to these sorts of people, you know, and the people, like, you've got Joel, and then, Eggs.
Aggie.
Eggs. I'm thinking EG. Aggie. You've got, you know, Paul, was it?
The other nurse.
The other nurse, yeah.
John.
Bad with names.
Oh, it's
and do you catch up with these guys regularly? Where did that leave you guys with friendships and stuff like that? Does that just take it to a whole new level?
Yeah, it does. It can't do anything but strengthen those. I guess from my point of view, they're all people that I owe a lot to when it comes to especially the ones that saved my life, and people like Scott, who have, like, he's offered so much, not only just through the recovery, but he's been such a big part of my life afterwards. And
I can hear it in the way you talk.
Yeah.
There's a big connection with
definitely.
you.
And I think that's important to have too, because without the people, it's really just a story. And I think it's important to highlight the people that make the story what it is, because I guess a lot of the times when you do hear stories like this specifically, it seems like it's just this story of this one singular person who has been through a shark attack and who has gotten back on the board and who's done all this stuff. And that's half of it. Like, there's a lot personally that goes into going through all of that, and a lot personally that went into going through the rehab every day and doing all of that. That's a personal journey, but it's not possible without the help of those other people. And I think that's such an important thing to highlight, no matter who you're talking to or what part of the story is. And that was something that, when I looked at how I shared my story, you know, in whether it be through podcasts, speaking, or even through the film, I really wanted to make sure to highlight those people. And it's not just something that I've heroically done, because, I mean, maybe it's just part of trying to be modest, or maybe it's just the Australian way of you know, telling a story. But I think it is important to highlight those other people, because they're not only a big part of keeping me here today, but they've been a big part of my life ever since. And, you know, I am incredibly grateful for them, and definitely owe them a lot.
And that's why I wanted to bring them up in my mind, because I can hear the way that you retell this story and recount this story, how much, like, love and gratitude that you have for each person that played a significant role in keeping you here with us. And then not only that, but keeping you here with us mentally, physically, and emotionally moving forward on your recovery. Obviously, family members and the people that are always been there for you in your life add and contribute to that, and might not be the main heroes in the story, but we need that group. We need that village of people around us to support us through all the ups and downs that we're going to go through inevitably. I always wonder, moving forward for you, is there, now that you're able to do what you want to, you hit that goal, where to from there for you? Like, what do you do now with the physical capabilities that you've gained back, having them taken away from you? What do you do now with the physical body that you've gotten now?
Make the most of it. So I guess kind of to tell that story, I need to backtrack a little bit and say that, after I got back on the board and had that first surf and ticked off that final goal, it's not like playing a video game where that's the last level and you're done.
The final boss.
Exactly. That wasn't the final boss for me. That as soon as I stood up and had that surf and kind of went back and called Scott about it and debriefed on it, it wasn't so much like there wasn't this relief that it was all over. It was kind of like, well, what next? Because you constantly reevaluate these goals, and this is true for this as much as it's true for life in general. Like for everyone. Everyone has goals that they're always working towards, and those goals change, and when you tick them off, it's not like you finish. So that goal, it changed from, okay, well, if I can stand up on a board, then I want to slowly work my way to riding shorter boards and hopefully getting back onto the boards that I was riding before. So it was just trying to then work on the techniques and stuff in surfing and strengthening myself in a way in which I could do that. Mm-hmm. And then it turned into the type of surfing that I could do. So I was like, I really want to, get barreled again and surf maybe some bigger waves and do that. And then it was, okay, well, am I ever going to be able to get back to a point of competing again? And I just wanted to compete in like a local board riders event. And I got to that point, and then it was like, well, I wonder if I can win an event again. And it got to the point where I won like just the local board riders event, which is not like it's not nothing like I was competing in before, but there was this enormous, like, it's just the next step where every time I tick something off, you're not really sure what's possible in the next level until you try and achieve it. And exactly. It kind of just kept going like that. And I was so focused at that stage. I'd ticked all of these surfing based goals. I'd got back to competing. I'd essentially gotten back to surfing at a level really similar to what I was before the attack.
Oh, wow.
Which is, not only incredible as far as what everyone thought was possible at the start, but incredible based on how my body is now set up and the adaptations that it has to undergo in order to work the way in which it does. But I kind of got back to a point where I could have gone back down that route of chasing the dream of becoming a professional. Like I could have made the decision to pick back up where I left off, but I had that thought to myself, and I was like, that would be amazing to be able to do. But then I had to be like, well, did I really go through this whole experience, everything that I've been through, all these hurdles, setting all these goals and overcoming them and learning so much about myself? Did I go through all of that just to become the person that I was beforehand? Yeah. And I had that realization. I was like, surely there needs to be a different outcome here. And I'm sure it would have been fine if I went down that route and I did all of that. But for me, I looked at everything I'd been through and what I had and ways in which I could now add value to the world around me. And my purpose changed from being a surfer to wanting to use this story and everything that I've learned through it and sharing this thing that people obviously find intriguing, but with the focus on the things that happened after the shark attack as a way of trying to help other people.
Yeah. And
that then became the goal of like wanting to surf again. And that's what I do every single day. And it's why I come and do podcasts, and it's why I get up on stage and speak, and it's why I made the movie is to try and just help one person, because that is something that I couldn't do beforehand. Like when I was working in the surf shop, I could probably make someone's day by selling them a surfboard they absolutely love, but you're never going to change someone's life. Whereas this story and this opportunity and this platform that I have now, it does have the opportunity to do so much more than I had before. And it not only gives me so much more purpose, but it can give so much more back to the world. So those goals of mine kind of changed. And I guess this has gotten a long way off track from the question that you had of as far as how, I push my body in this body that I have now today. But I kind of split these goals in two. There's the, this overall purpose goal, which is now to use this story to help other people. And that's always going to be a constant. But then I'm a very, I guess, results-oriented person in a way, a very, very goals-oriented person. Not so much results, but more about the goals. And I know that I'm always going to have to look after my leg to keep it strong, to keep it healthy. So hopefully it'll last as long as it does, because we don't really know how long that is going to essentially be as strong as what it is for, or anything like that. But I have always struggled to motivate myself to go and just work in the gym when it's not working towards something. So I kind of often have to have a reason to go in there. So I started setting myself little challenges that would start to push what was possible as far as with my body in general, but also prove what's possible with this leg and what it can do. And a big part of that is 50% of that is to keep the leg healthy, because it's a reason to do stuff and stay active and to work in the gym or do whatever I'm doing. But the other half of it is to essentially put myself in a position that emulates struggle. So to get to that point where you kind of want to give up, but then finding something within you to push through it. And that's pushed me to take on a few more endurance sort of events. It started off very simply just with a friend of mine who came to me and said, do you want to do the Oxfam 100K walk? Which is walking from the Hawkesbury River into Manly. And I did that the first time, and I actually really enjoyed the process of training for it and doing all of these walks and working towards that goal. And the positive side of it is it kept my leg strong and it kept it healthy and it pushed me physically. And when we finished that, it was the same sort of thing when I was like, okay, well, what next? And it's kind of just flowed into different goals that I've set myself along the way. Exactly. And that's, I'm always going to need something like that to push me along. And I think there's so much value in not only having that for myself physically, but having that mentally as well. I'd say that there's kind of two types of resilience that we gain through life. One of them is one where we get put in a position that we don't plan for, that is out of the blue. And this is the unexpected moments in life. There's shark attack and things along that sort of vein. But then there's other situations that you can put yourself into which will test that resilience. And for me, that is these physical challenges. Alongside of that, a part of it has always been, I guess, sharing my story too and trying to, especially when I stand up on stage and share it, because that's not a comfortable environment for me. So that tests myself in a different sort of way. But I have this idea that I want to always put myself in a position where I need to display resilience, because it is like a muscle and it's something that you can only make stronger by working on it. But it's a much safer environment to do it if it's something that's planned or something like a physical event where hopefully there's no sharks involved or anything like that, and no phone calls or anything that has the negative sides of this resilience that comes out of the blue. But I think it's so valuable to put ourselves in those positions where we do feel uncomfortable and our back is against the wall and we are forced to show something to help us push through that, because it can only make us stronger for whatever we face at some stage in life. Because again, like these challenges that we face, shark attack or not, like we're all going to be faced with that. And the only advice I can have for anyone who is faced with any sort of adversity in life is, when it comes to overcoming that, how far you go along that journey will be determined only by the attitude that you take towards it. And that is something that we don't really know what that looks like until we have been through it for ourselves. And to bring it back to what you mentioned about people like Scott in my life, one of the biggest things that helped me through that recovery for me, because I hadn't been in that situation, I hadn't been forced to show resilience up until that point, was having someone like him to help guide me through it. And that's something that if you do have someone like that within your life that can help guide you through it, that's great. But I know for a lot of people, you might not know who to turn to. You might not know where to look for something like this. And that's where I guess I hope with my story and the ability to share it. I know a vast majority of people, they're not going to listen to this podcast and be like, I'm going to change my life. But sometimes when they do go through whatever struggle they're going to go through at some point in the future, they just have a bit of a reference point to reflect on.
Yeah, a precedent.
Just something where they can be like, there is a bit of hope.
Yep.
And if it's something that helps them set goals, like what Scott said, if it's something like that idea of just being a little bit better than yes, like there's so many small takeaways because we're all different. The situations are different. And what applies to one person is not going to apply to the other. But just having something that someone can grasp onto and provide that little bit of hope, I think can give so much when it comes to knowing, at the end of all of this, you've done your small part to help.
100%. And I totally hear you when you say it's the small parts and the take-homes that sit there and they fester, but you don't even know they're there until you need them. So you're going to go through your idea of a shark attack, right? And then from that, we're going to remember the conversations that we've heard and that we've had. And then we're going to find some support and people that might believe in us more than we might be believing in ourselves in the moment. We're going to be able to piece this puzzle together to be able to set small goals, potentially changing our complete life direction and moving forward like we never thought we could had none of that stuff begun. I think that's pretty powerful.
Yeah. I think you do a good job at summarizing that.
I'll snip that up for you. So I think anyone listening here has joined us on such an amazing adventure, and I honestly could continue talking to you for the next hour about the ins and outs, and it would be good if you were local because we just get you back every week and would have a constant little chat. But I know it's hard; you live far away. So, but if you're going to leave anyone. If you want to leave a message to the world, I like to end on this, and I go, all right, let's bring our story, let's bring the people first podcast story that we've experienced to the message to the world. If you were to have a message, Brett, to the world, what would it be? If I could just go push a button right now on this keyboard and then beep, I just tapped into the brains of all the 7 billion people on the planet, even the 1 in 111. 3.5 billion that were attacked by sharks, yourself and the others. If we could press this button, what message would you leave to the world?
I think there's probably two parts to it, which will probably make it slightly more complicated than what it could be. But it's summarized by like the podcast name, right? People first. At the base of everything, like every story, there is a person at the center of that. And when it comes to looking around at all these different stories, whether you find my story inspiring or any other person, that there is a human at the center of that that's the same as you, talking to the viewer that we've just beeped into there.
Yeah.
And I'm not a special person just based off what I've been through. I'm just someone who has reacted to the situation that is in front of me. And the real takeaway when it comes to what I would love for people to say, okay, that is the message from this story, is that it's this here, that it's not about what happens to you. And I know I've said this a bunch of times throughout this podcast, shark attack or not, doesn't matter what happens to you. What matters is how you respond.
Yes.
Because how you respond, I think, is the true reflection of who you are as a person, but that's also where pride lives. Like it's not in the outcome, it's in how you respond. And I think that is what we need to focus on more than where we end up going in the end. And that's the most important thing for me, and I think for a lot of people.
100%. And people are going to be listening who know me go, I reckon that's exactly what I've told them over and over again.
Yeah.
And we harp on it because we know we've experienced things, no matter what it is, that shark attack. I've shared my story. I created a podcast from my story because of my shark attack, not literally.
Wait, you're just telling me that now?
I think we're well aware that I've been attacked by a shark, but just in case you're not keeping up, I'm not the one that was attacked by a shark. But yeah, and so then having that saying that, it's not about what happens to you. You know what I mean? It's what you do next, and it's how you stand up, and it's how you move forward, and it's about then what you do with that story, because keeping it to yourself is not something that I think we should do. I think we should share. The people should share, because it's how we bond. It's how we create new precedents for ourselves of what's possible, and we're helping each person. Now, I know you've got a show, so how long has that been out for? Since the one on Stan? What's it called?
It's called Attacking Life.
I wrote it here. Yeah, Attacking Life.
Attacking Life.
On Stan Australia.
Yes.
So would that be something that you would recommend the viewers to go watch?
Oh, yes, definitely.
And
of
rip
course.
in?
So
I want to talk for another hour about that alone.
Yeah,
but,
I know.
yeah.
So the film, I mean, I mentioned it before. The idea of the film was, A, to get the story out there. It kind of had three different things. To get the story out there was one. To share the perspectives of other people who are a part of my story is the second reason. But then I guess the third reason was to share the story in a way in which I found fitting. I had a lot of opportunities early on to, in quotes, sell my story to someone who would make it. And I always knew that if that was the case, it was going to be a Jaws-esque recollection of everything. And that's not something that I wanted to do, because for me, something that has been a big part of the way in which I have responded to it is not holding any sort of ill feeling or resentment towards sharks. And that's something that I knew I could only get across if I made the film
yourself.
Yeah. And teaming up with a good friend of mine and doing everything in-house was such a big effort, but it was so worth it in the end to look at it, not only, when we screened it in the cinema, which we were only able to do once, but then to see it sitting there on Stan and know that we made that was an incredible feeling.
I'm so keen to watch it. You've actually, because I'm a Netflix guy, I'm going over to Stan just to get my free trial.
Exactly, yeah. I make sure I tell everyone you can at least get the free trial. So I
might hang out there for a while, though.
Yeah.
To my wife's like, not another subscription one. But so guys, if people wanted to reach out to you, bud, how would they do that? How would they reach you? What would they do? They'd go to Facebook. What's the best thing? Instagram. What do you use the most?
I probably use Instagram the most. My handle, I guess they're called, is just Brett Conellan. But there's
Connellan, right?
Yeah, that's the one. Or my website has a bunch of info on it and some contact info on there, and that's just www.brettconellan.com. So perfect. Simple one. I like to. It's very good having a pretty unique surname, because it means that everything's open.
Not
and free.
stolen. Shane Richards is everywhere. I can never get it ever. You had like these Shane Richards 12491.
Yeah.
How many other Shane Richards are there? Shane Richards 1, Shane Richards 2. I want to thank you so much for taking the time, 2 hours out of your day, to come share your story with us. It means a lot to me. And as I said to you when you got here, we don't do this for any profit. I mean, if one day we are profitable, great. But we do it to share stories. We do it to connect the world. We do it to help people get their message out to the world. And I want to thank you so much for spending the time with us. I thoroughly enjoyed spending the time with you. And it's something that I won't forget. And, you want to change one person's life, I will remember this forever. And if I'm ever in my next shark attack, because I've had a few of them, not literally, guys, relax, I will then use all of the stuff that I've learned with you today. So thanks so much. And you've affected me. So thanks.
Thank you.
All right, guys, if you would love to help support the channel, just make sure you like, subscribe, give us a 5-star rating, because let's be real, these are 5-star interviews, and share, because otherwise these messages stay on the platforms, they don't move. And it is already so difficult in a world of stupidity around us to get good stories out there. So thanks so much for listening, guys, and I will see you in the gym.